Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just did my post-spring top 25. Was not the easiest practice in the world, but definitely felt pretty good about my top 25. But let's jump into some QB battles that are still raging out there in the college football world. There were a ton going into spring camp. There are a lot less now. South Carolina was figured out. It's going to be Lenora Sellers over there. We'd had a couple more guys lock up their starting positions, but there's still a bunch of big time ones to watch. And I'll start with USC. It's Miller Moss against Jaden Mayava, and a lot of people will tell you it's Miller Moss's job. It's Miller Moss's job, but what I watched throughout spring does not necessarily make me feel super confident that it is. That being said, Miller Moss is the leader going into fall camp. He is the guy that, knows the playbook a little bit better, had that incredible performance in the Holiday Bowl against Louisville, did incredible things throughout the offseason and all of this stuff. But when I was watching spring ball, and especially that spring game, Jaden Mayava was the better player. And it wasn't necessarily by huge margins. Neither of them had the greatest day, but at the end of the day, Jaden Mayava was the better player, so he's made up ground in that time. Can he make up enough ground to be the starter in week one? I don't necessarily know, but I do know that one of the great equalizers when you have this kind of battle between two guys is who can make stuff happen with his legs, who can make stuff happen kind of off schedule. That would be more Jaden Mayava than Miller Moss. He has that ability to extend plays, make plays with his legs, and do certain things that Miller Moss just kind of can't, is more of a pocket passer than Jaden Mayava is. That being said, Miller Moss is a fantastic player. I think he can be successful enough to win games for them, to keep this job, to continue down the path, but there are a couple of games that could make him look over his shoulder pretty aggressively. If he gets to a Michigan game or to a Penn State game and it doesn't necessarily go the way he wants, he throws a couple of picks, he makes a couple of bad mistakes. There's a guy right there that is ready to play that can absolutely help you and maybe not put you in as much trouble, being able to get out of the pocket, get 5 yards with his legs, and live to see another down instead of having to throw the ball down the field or maybe making a bad decision because you can't do that with your legs. So, excuse me. This is one I'm going to be watching very closely when fall camp comes around. I think it's likely that Miller Moss will be the starter for week one. I feel fairly confident in that, but Jaden Mayava is not going to give him a lot of leeway, and they play LSU to start the year, so if Miller Moss puts up a stinker, especially against that defense, things could get interesting fairly quickly over there at USC. And then let's move on to Ohio State, and let's talk about Will Howard versus Devin Brown. This is one that it's probably Will Howard's to lose, if we're being totally honest. Devin Brown's a great player, but honestly, if he was going to take the job, he would have taken it by now. I think he's been there for long enough. He knows the playbook. Will Howard was coming in kind of blind a little bit, and if he was going to, plant his flag, assert his dominance in this position, I think it would have been obvious by now, and it is not obvious. In fact, I think Will Howard probably had the better spring. So I think Will Howard's going to be the guy. I think especially with what he can do with his legs, it's kind of the same thing we were talking about with Jaden Mayava and Miller Moss. Devin Brown, a little bit more of a pocket passer, doesn't necessarily have that ability to create with his legs quite as much as Will Howard does, and the read options with these running backs are going to be a huge asset for this team. It keeps everyone on their toes. Make sure that Will Howard is comfortable in this offense because it's something he did a ton at Kansas State. So I expect Will Howard to likely win out on this one. The thing about that is he's going to have no leash. What we saw last year cannot happen again at Ohio State. We cannot have, bad quarterback play from Kyle McCord. They cannot have losing to Michigan, especially, again, that cannot happen. So the leash is not going to be long, and especially when you have Devin Brown right there who understands the offense, might not be the most dynamic player in the world, but can, execute this thing and make it, at least move forward. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting conversation. And then, just for fun, you have Julian Sayin sitting back there that a lot of people love, and if both of these guys fall on their face a little bit early on in the season, there will be some fans that are yelling for that one. So it'll be fascinating to watch all of this. I think Will Howard will be plenty successful. I think he will keep the job. I think he will be the guy. And I think we might just look back on this and say that was not much of a battle, to be totally honest with you. But at the end of the day, there are some questions there, and there's still no definitive starting quarterback for week one. So it'll be fascinating to watch that unfold, not only in fall camp, but well into the season, see how Will Howard is doing and see just how long that leash is. But then let's get to Washington, and let's talk about Will Rogers and Damon Williams Jr., because this is one that was entirely under the radar to me. I kind of just penciled in Will Rogers as the starter for Washington, didn't even give it a second thought. But Damon Williams Jr. put in a remarkable spring. In fact, Jed Fish said it was the best spring he's seen from a freshman quarterback. And when we talk about Jed Fish, we saw it a year ago. Jaden DeLauro started the season, and then Noah Fifita came in. That could be what we're looking at, where you start the guy that has more reps under his belt and has a better grasp of just college football as a whole, and then he starts to struggle a little bit, and you look around and you say maybe this season is not necessarily going the way we thought. Maybe they've lost a couple of games by now or something like that, and you start looking towards the next year, or you're in a position where he's holding you back a little bit, but you're still winning games, and you really want to get that next level like they did at Arizona a year ago. You bring in Damon Williams Jr., maybe you can hit that next level. So it's going to be fascinating to watch this. Jed Fish is not someone that shies away from making that tough decision at quarterback. So I expect Will Rogers to be the starter in week 1. I don't expect him to be the starter in week 8, but that's something that we'll definitely unpack throughout the season. It'll be fascinating to watch how much that really factors into what Washington does this upcoming year. And then we have Nebraska. It's Dylan Raiola versus Heinrich Haarberg, and this one feels like the most slam dunk. It's got to be Raiola. There's almost no way. The way that it would have happened, to be totally honest with you, was if spring he just fell on his face. He just had nothing. He was not playing really good football. Heinrich Haarberg was playing, dominating him in spring practice. That was really the only reality where Dylan Raiola was not going to be the starter here. Well, Dylan Raiola won the spring. He was incredible in the spring game, was definitely the best quarterback that I saw in that spring game by a fairly comfortable margin. So I think Heinrich Haarberg is a fantastic safety net, kind of like Washington with Damon Williams Jr. I think you have the ability where if Dylan Raiola, if it gets to him a little bit, the freshman mistakes and all of this crazy stuff that he's going to be going up against, it could be that, you see Heinrich Haarberg start a game here and there throughout the season. But at the end of the day, I look at this kind of the way I look at Washington and maybe some other teams around the country where you have a young guy, you have an older guy. You know that Dylan Raiola is your starter in 2025. So if you've lost a couple of games, and even if he's struggling, I think it's more beneficial for you to keep him on the field, let him kind of do trial by fire, learn on the job, and then you roll into 2025 really confident in his abilities. So I think this one will be interesting. I'd be a little bit surprised if we saw Haarberg start a ton of games, barring any injuries, but I do think Raiola will be the guy. I think he'll make some freshman mistakes, but at the end of the day, I think he'll be the guy throughout the year just because this is probably the year before the year for Nebraska, and you want to set yourself up for 2025, and the best way to do that is to have Dylan Raiola on the field. So it'll be fascinating to watch that. There are a couple of more that I think will pop up in fall camp. We had Jeff Sims just commit to Arizona State, so that one could get a little bit more interesting. So tons of stuff to watch throughout the spring. Mike Wright is going to Northwestern, definitely one to watch there. So it'll be fascinating to watch all of these unfold. We'll probably revisit these throughout the offseason, probably closer to fall camp to give you guys an idea of where they stand. But for the time being, we're going to take our final break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the transfer portal, give you guys a little bit of an update where everything is at, a little more than 2 weeks after it's closed, but definitely some big time commits and some bigger players still on the board that we definitely want to get to. So stick with us and we will be right back with that.